Hello, this is Property Matters, a weekly catch-up on the world of property supported by Fairview International Property Consultancy and auctionproperty.co.uk. And we're live every week on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn and our website propertymatterstv.co.uk. And if you're watching on our website, please leave us a Google review. And if you're watching on the socials, get involved in the conversation too. Our email address for any discussion topics, hello@propertymatterstv.co.uk. There's a podcast version of the show every Monday from 10 a.m. if you'd like to take us on the move with you, available from the podcast icons on the other side of the screen. And let's take a look then at this week's property news with our property expert, Joe Joshies. Hi, Joe.
Hi, Paul. Hi, everybody. And I hope you're all having a good week. Plenty to talk about in property, which I'm sure Paul will put me to the test on in a minute.
Indeed. Renters reform is back in the news. That's because next week, 14th, the Renters Reform Bill comes back into the next reading in Parliament, and people are getting a little bit uptight about deposits in rent. So let's just talk people through this. A new law could stop landlords from demanding several months' rent up front from new tenants. The proposal would make it unlawful for a landlord to request or accept more than a month's rent in advance. This has unsurprisingly been welcomed by some campaigners, but not, of course, proved popular with agents and landlords. The Renters Reform Coalition has condemned what it describes as extortionate upfront costs traditionally required from renters prior to taking on a new lease, saying this has discriminated against less wealthy tenants. But the NRLA, the National Residential Landlords Association, is among those who voice concerns that such restrictions could pose a risk to landlords if tenants cannot show other means of ensuring that they can pay rent regularly. Tom Darling, who's the director of the Renters Reform Coalition, says for too long extortionate rent in advance demands have allowed landlords to discriminate against poorer renters. It's great the government has acted on this and listening to renters groups by setting out clearly that this practice will be prohibited. The NRLA said restricting rent in advance combined with freezing house benefit rates and not enough rental housing to meet demand is creating significant barriers for those with poor or no credit histories needing access to the sector. This includes international students and those employed on short-term and variable basis contracts where their income might fluctuate. So there's a perfect storm in a teacup, isn't it, Joe? So on one side you've got people saying, well, look, it's not fair to get those that need access to the rental market, and it's always going to be those at the low end of the market that are going to need it most desperately. Restricting them by wanting 6 months or 4 months in advance, it's a good thing from their point of view. They only have to provide a month. But on the other hand, of course, you've got landlords who are thinking, well, how have I got any protections? And who knows who I'm putting in my property, especially if I'm prepared to take on a foreign student with no UK-based guarantor.
Yes, interesting discussion on this one, Paul. As far as I'm concerned, and my views on this is that I believe that the government is doing a grand job in trying to really create a problem for all landlords and potentially tenants who are then likely to have a lesser amount of properties available to rent, because these are the sort of things that steer the landlords away from the buy-to-let market. They don't want to have that uncertainty. It's like having a property and letting somebody else tell you how you're going to manage it and run it. And you could do some of it to a certain extent, but not to a level where they can start to say, A, you've got to have fixed rents and you can't have more than that. That's been muted around in London. And B, now you can't have, hold a sufficient amount of deposit or have a sufficient amount of deposit up ahead from perhaps somebody who is either a foreign student coming in or anyone that doesn't have that appropriate credit clearance, so that they can't take that risk. The risk is that you could take a 5-week deposit and a 1 month's rent in advance with someone who may not have all of the tick boxes, and then find that you've got yourself a sitting-in tenant and spend the next 18 months in court trying to get them out. They've got no fallback, and that's part of the reason when sometimes landlords and their agents will decide that maybe the best thing to do is have something solid, like 6 months worth of rent in advance, and therefore, and then after that they can go on a month to month basis as well, so that it's held as part of their either deposit or is freed out to the landlord, whichever they tend to agree. But it's only designed so that it's an availability and it gives the landlord some comfort against a tenant that perhaps would not normally be successful in achieving that tendency. They may not have the credibility. They may have had CCJs. They may have all sorts of other things that may, and more than anything else, as you rightly point out, they may not have a guarantor, UK-based guarantor, that is prepared to stand up and say, "Well, look, if this guy comes in from abroad and all of a sudden, they do a runner, I've got somebody to fall back on." In fact, I'd be shocked that there'll be any guarantors that would want to guarantor, for someone that is in that position anyway. Because if they do go back, even that guarantor is going to have a job trying to get any money out of them if they've actually ended up having to pay. So it's a bit of a real mess, to be honest with you. And I think they'll be well advised to steer away from it. But at the moment, we know that the government has got this attitude about they're going to tell us how we're going to run our lives, and that's probably not where it's going to be.
Yeah, I mean, the government cutting off any assurance that responsible landlords might seek when renting to those who cannot prove their ability to pay. I mean, in the end, those people are going to be the people who suffers because no one's going to rent to them. And so, in many respects, the government could make those who will suffer the most be the people that they most want to help.
That's right, and they're already doing that, Paul, to a large extent. I mean, if the government really wants to run the world of letting, then maybe they should really build as many houses as they can and rent their own properties to these tenants. In fact, they shouldn't have sold the blocks of properties that they sold in Thatcher's days, and they wouldn't be in half the problems that they are now. And one side they want their cake, and the other side they want to eat it too, and that's really where we are now. And landlords have been, leaving the rental market in droves for a number of reasons. There are possibilities that they could have reprieved that, but things like this will actually definitely, firm up and cement the situation where landlords will say, actually, you know what, it's better for me to be out of this completely because I don't want this hassle. And that will be the government's fault for reducing the lettable stock in the market. And then the tenants are going to suffer because those tenants are not going to have, so they're going to be back into hotel rooms, back into housing of multiple occupancies, back into bed and breakfasts, short term, overnight accommodation, all of that stuff that the government actually ends up having to pay for. And then that gives those people that perhaps are just being the pawn in the game of rentals and the government, homeless statuses, having insufficient accommodation, and their children having to suffer living in a room. Yeah, this is definitely the wrong track to be on.
I mean, I suppose it's down to the ministers when they discuss it next week to come up with some kind of clarity on how tenants who are unable to easily demonstrate their ability to afford and sustain these tenancies should do so. They're saying expecting landlords to take on high levels of risk without practical assurance is not a sustainable solution and risks further exacerbating the challenges in an already constrained market. I mean, that is the point, isn't it? We're already short of property. To make it even more difficult for people to get on the ladder is just going to make it the survival of the richest.
Well, exactly that. I mean, they are not going to be able to. There's not enough accommodation now already. Rent values have gone sky high because of supply and demand. The demand is huge, the supply is somewhat limited, and people are having to pay silly amounts of rents in order to get that. Land Landlords are happy with that because they're going to get more money. But the problem they got to a large extent is that they might end up putting somebody into the property who subsequently then, once they're in, cannot continue to afford to maintain and keep the rental that they've agreed to up. So that then falls into arrears, that then falls into courts, and before you know it, you've got a 12-month, 18-month court case situation in order to get the tenant out. They need to be done through court. Why? Because they've got to go back to the council and say, I've been evicted, and then the council has to house them. What do the council do? They put them into hotel rooms because there's nowhere else that's going to take those things. So I don't really think that they've thought about this very, very carefully, and they're not building enough properties at the moment, and I can't see where they're going to get that in order to put all these people, and so they'll be in the streets. It really is a shoddy whole game here at the moment, and they're having a go at the wrong people that actually could support the government by going out and investing, renting, as long as they can rent it under their steam, not under what the government tells them to do.
There's some interesting data from the Lettings Hub which revealed that 15% of tenants paying the highest amounts of rent, that's 5,000 and above, they rely on paying their rent in advance, and it's likely that this trend is driven by particularly overseas students where the tenant may be unable to secure a UK-based guarantor, of course. Additionally, self-employed tenants with fluctuating incomes often use advance payments to demonstrate their financial reliability and secure a home. Meanwhile, just 6% of tenants paying £1,000 or less a month in rent choose to make their rental payments in advance. So that's only 6% do that. The revelation suggests, therefore, that this is not a widespread practice which is being forced upon tenants. Instead, it appears to be a valuable option used by a minority to secure a property which is suitable for their unique circumstances. Across all rental price bands, just 7% of tenancies begin with an upfront rental payment of more than 4 months' rent. This figure has not changed significantly in the 3 years that the Lettings Hub has been tracking the data. So it's only really in a small amount of cases that this sort of thing is happening. But even then, I was surprised to read that 4 months' rent in advance is pretty standard.
Well, look, the actual agreement is five weeks worth of rent as a deposit and 1 month's rent in advance. That's the AST ruling as they are. However, depending on those individual circumstances, there may be other agreements, other caveats, other cautions that they have to do it. And in this case, if there's someone traveling in from abroad and has no rent guarantor available within the United Kingdom, they may have to take a view and say, well, I've got to give this guy 6 months rent. And that may be the bit that swings it for them renting it as opposed to an ordinary person renting it. Why would a landlord in their wildest dream want to rent to somebody with 5 weeks deposit and 1 month's rent when they have the opportunity to rent to someone who's paid them 6 months in front? The government is really blinded by the idea that they think that these people that invest in properties to rent are just born stupid. They're not. It's a business for them. It's not It's not something that they just do because they feel this is a charitable status. It's a business, and as a business, they're going to make a business decision, and they don't need the government to tell them how to make the business decision of their property and their investment. I think the government is just interfering for no particular reason. If anything, they're shooting themselves in the foot because these people will say, okay, well, look, if you don't want us to invest, we won't invest, we won't buy these properties, and you then won't get these properties to rent out to your tenants who are homeless. So I think the tenants who actually stand up there and say, oh, this is a great idea, also need to be looking in the mirror and saying, well, actually, if we continue to do this, we are not going to have the accommodation that we'd like if that is our situation, my personal circumstance. It might be that they're a family, might be that they're a young couple, there might be just someone that's like single parent, single mother. All of these situations are going to be causing or having a problem caused simply because someone is trying to tell somebody else how to run their life.
One landlord who's commented on this says, I use it for people who have CCJs that are usually from bad relationships or have money behind them but don't have someone who will be a guarantor. I've had people who have family members who are willing to pay 6 months rent up front for them but are either unable or unwilling to sign on as a guarantor indefinitely. Let's face it, the same basic principle as paying your car insurance in one payment or over a year. You still have to pay it, so find one that works for you best. And then another comment says, if landlords take the everything will be fine pill, then overseas students without a euro guarantor, professionals who earn less than affordability rating, and those with poor credit won't be able to rent anywhere. So, there's a tongue-in-cheek in that comment there. The real reasons that landlords take rent in advance is to disguise it as an unprotected deposit. While the new Renters Reform Bill may become law, it highlights the flaws in the system, as the tenant fee ban has made little or no difference in curbing the practices of unscrupulous landlords and agents. What's your thoughts on all of that?
Well, look, money talks. It's as simple as that, isn't it? And if somebody wants something, and the only way to get it is through having to put a higher amount of deposit, or make an agreement that is outside what is the right and the wrong, or as far as the government's concerned, people will come to the table and say, "Well, look, I need a roof over my head. I've got a family, and if that's the best I'm going to do, that's what I'm going to have to do to try and make that happen for it." I think the government has got blinkers on their eyes if they think that all of this is just something that they're going to control. They're not going to control it. It's not going to happen. And yes, they might have a certain number of landlords that might adhere to it, but there are going to be many landlords who are going to say, actually, this is my property, it's my investment, it's my choice as to how I want to do it. And if you don't want to join the bandwagon and get on this and say, look, I want the property, then there's so many others. There's so many people now that are out there looking to rent a property. But not only that, it's not just the foreign students, it's just people that are in circumstances in our own hometowns. If there might be a home where somebody's separated, one person's living in one, the other one's going somewhere else, they got to rent, they might have children, they got to put them up. It's a huge complex scenario that goes on every single day of our lives. And the first and foremost, as we know, is a roof over the head where possible. Safety is at your home. The kids want to be made safe. Families want to be safe. So I can't imagine in my wildest dream that, someone's not going to find a way around it. The government can say whatever they like, but, they will find a way around renting that. And whether it's scrupulous or not scrupulous, right or wrong, a roof over their head to protect their family is what any man would do.
Yeah, if the rent is £500, then 6 months' rent is £3,000, and if the rent is due, then the rent is due again in 6 months' time, and this will be stated in the tenancy agreement. So there's not really any way of hiding it, says one person. And the reply to that: not all agents or landlords follow the same practices. Some require rent in advance, treating it like a deposit while still collecting rent the following month. In your example, taking 6 months' rent up front from a potentially high-risk tenant is simply kicking the can down the road. And lastly, my understanding is that you take 6 months' rent and charge another 6 months' rent in 6 months' time. That's illegal. That's legal under the current legislation. However, if you take 6 months' rent and ask for monthly rent from month 2, then 5 months of that money must be registered as a deposit, or the landlord agent faces the consequences of repayment, etc.
Yes, and each one will adhere to that. I mean, if you've got to go and register the 5 weeks as out of the six months that they've taken, so be it. I mean, if it means that it's going to secure the right tenant and give the landlord the amount of rent money that they're requiring, then I can't imagine why somebody wouldn't do that. Whether it's a landlord or an agent, they're all going to do it because they want to rent the property, and the tenant wants to rent the property from the landlord. So it's I think they're just complicating something that doesn't. It's the old adage here, Paul: fixing something that's actually not broke. And by trying to fix it, they will break it.
And of course, the other point being it's only 7% of the market, so it's only a small potato, really, in the grand scheme of things. Anyway, let's move on. Story number 2. A great deal has been written about how changes to capital gains tax in the last budget will prevent farmers from handing down their farms to their sons and daughters. However, this change to tax laws will also prevent people from handing down other businesses to their families, like estate agencies, and this has hardly been covered by the press at all. This article by Adam Walker. When I started my career in a estate agency in 1980, a great many of my competitors had names like Smith and Son, or sometimes Smith and Daughters. They were family firms which, in some cases, have been passed through many generations. Over the 32 years, I've sold quite a few family firms, because that's what he does for a living. He sells businesses. Many date back to the Victorian times. We've had 2 family owners owned firms for sale on the books just now. One of them has been trading since the 1930s, the other since the 1960s. Quite a few family-owned firms still remain, but I fear that their days could be numbered under this new legislation. I find that family firms are often run in a very different way to their corporate competitors. They're more likely to make decisions over long term with the future in mind. They value stability over short-term profits, and they often care passionately about the well-being of their staff. It's an interesting point. Obviously, lots has been made of the farmers, but there's implications for any family-owned business. And when we talked the other week about this new hybrid estate agency model and the disappearance of the agency from the high street, it's just another evolution in the way the property market is changing.
Yes, I mean the property market since Adam in 1980, and likewise, I was at the same time on the starting of that journey, it used to be very much a family, local village, local town ethos, and that's how estate agency was, and to some extent, in some parts of the country, still is. It's not everywhere that the corporates have managed to get in, and it's not everywhere the corporates find that that profit or that business works for them, that model works for them, because they are looking at volumes. But the sons and the daughters who are going to be the next next in line to take over a family business are the ones that run it locally. They might be in a community. Let's say they might, work locally. They might have schooled locally. These are the things that makes it as a local agent, and so that will continue to some extent. But yes, in the bigger towns, it's the corporations because they're looking at volumes and numbers. An agency since 1980 has changed its model to a large extent. Paul, it used to be sales based. It was a sales estate agency was based on selling property, not letting property, and now it's the other way around. The letting agency part of the business was the poorer relation because not many people back in the 80s were into renting properties. We still had council houses that we hadn't sold off, so we didn't have this problem of trying to build some more houses of things that Mrs. Thatcher said, "Oh, go and buy our council houses." And now we're back, we're right round and we need to build more houses, but we haven't got the land and it's too expensive to do those things. So it used to be sales, and the letting was a poor relation. Today, it's the letting and the sales are the poor relations because not everybody can afford to get a mortgage, so they have to rent. So they're now doing a new Margaret Thatcher turnaround on the letting business to make sure that they help to screw up that part of the business, and then people might be able to be in a position to go and buy again. But that is expensive because obviously trying to borrow money and meet the criteria that they have to in order to go and get a mortgage is becoming tougher and tougher. So I'm not sure that the government is actually in a position to tell anybody how to run their business. And that's what Adam's saying, that obviously there was a time when, daughters and sons and sons and sons and, fathers and sons used to be able to run their own local businesses and there was no problem passing it down. But now the government want a piece of that action too, in terms of the inheritance tax. And so they're constantly, I mean, we're just being taxed left, right, and center, no matter who it is, what government it's going to be. They're all doing the same thing in order to make things work the best they think they can. But on the streets, on the ground level, it's still traditional businesses. It's still a people business. And yes, the models have changed. I mean, the hybrid model, they've gone off the high street. There are now more people that are working from home, working individually, more franchise operations than they were ever. But it's still a people business. It's not going to happen to be all AI based. You can do so much of it as artificial intelligence and so many robots. But the long and the short of it is, this is a home 9 times out of 10. It is a property that is going to be a family home, and people want to be able to talk to somebody, understand, walk around, feel the property before they actually make a commitment. I don't think it will change drastically, but there are changes constantly happening, and the agency world is continuing to change.
I do agree with Adam. He says here that he believes that these tax changes are motivated by the politics of envy rather than the need to raise revenue. There seems to be a view that everyone should have a start at the bottom irrespective, and that giving your children a head start in life is somehow wrong. And when you look at all of the recent tax changes, there's anyone who's worked hard to get themselves a property and then handed that down, every route that you take is punished to make sure that money that you've paid in and invested in good faith and paid tax on is then taxed again when you take it out.
It's absolutely a envy situation, but it shouldn't be. I mean, people are working hard to make those businesses happen. They're putting their necks on the chopping block when they're going out and investing and renting and then going out marketing and trying to win the business, to run the business. There shouldn't be an envy role, but it's clear. And I've always stated in our programs over the last now nearly 5 years or so that it's always been the case where the government feels that they can use the property market as a yo-yo when they feel that they need to. And here is a prime example of exactly that. Both in the renters reform bill and here in taxation on businesses and properties or any other opportunity, they're always looking to see how they can find that extra few pence from people that are actually working hard, work and worked hard. I mean, I've been in the business for 45 odd years now and continue to sort of do that and enjoy it. But there is work involved in to do that, and it's quite sad to see that they're not motivating the people to say go out and earn more money and do that. They're actually almost wanting everybody to join the dole queue and say, well, actually, you might as well just come and join us and we'll pay you to stay at home.
He makes the point that if you look at the wider picture, there are 260,000 privately owned companies that employ 10 or more people at the moment in the UK, and they collectively employ over 14 million staff in those companies. This is about half the private sector workforce. At the moment, around 85,000 family businesses are passed on to the next generation every year. A great many of these businesses will not be able to raise the money necessary to pay the tax bill and will have to be sold. It's ironic, really, that he's saying that the decision is wrong because obviously that's affecting 14 million working people, the very people that Labour keeps saying they want to support. So it does seem rather surprising when there's 260,000 businesses, 85,000 of those sold every year, 14 million people involved. That's a big risk to the 14 million working people, 14 million working class people that Labour says they want to help.
Well, do they really want to help? I mean, I can't see where the help is in this situation because they seem to be scuppering up something that is not necessary to do. So I'm not really sure that they're helping. I mean, we've known already the results in the first 6 months of their tenure that everything that they supposedly promised is not being now delivered to such a point that the banks and the inflation rate and all those things are being affected constantly. And I've said many times, and I can't see where they are going to motivate this, but the way things are going, they're still motivating for people to almost keep their money in the building society and not get involved in other things primarily. But even that potentially could go wrong again because they think that the rate's going to come down. I don't believe they will because I think there's too many things that are now not going to plan. So they'll probably have to stay steady. But I think that they're just trying to fix things that are just not actually broke, just to make a point.
Last story this week, bumper issue this week, 3 stories in the week. Westminster Council plans to ban estate agents from placing sale and to let signs outside residential and commercial properties unless explicit permission is requested for each one. Estate agent boards of a certain number and size can currently be erected on properties without the benefit of advertising consent. But that could be about to change as the council in Westminster wants to restrict the use of signs across the entire borough. Some parts of Westminster already ban estate agent boards under Regulation 7 direction, which came into effect in 2010. The existing ban prohibits the display of agent boards across all conservation areas. Estate agent boards cannot be displayed in these areas unless advertisement consent is obtained. The authorisation for this existing partial ban is in selected areas expires in May 2025, and the council now wants to extend the ban. It's seeking consent from the Minister of Housing, and they're saying the council argues that estate agency boards have an adverse visual impact on the borough, while also complaining that the boards are no longer relevant given that most property searches now take place online. And there's really the point I needed to get to with you, Joe, which is there still a role for the estate agency board given that most of this stuff happens online now?
Absolutely. There is absolutely no reason why for sale boards shouldn't be put up. The government and the councils are just looking to make some money in another way now, another tax, another stealth, and thinks, well, we might as well charge the agencies who put in an application to try and get some money out of them to put a board up. The fact that they don't look in the mirror and ask themselves how filthy the towns are just because the government locally can't be bothered to get them cleaned. So they pick on the agency board to say that they are a eyesore. I think most of the operatives in most of the councils are probably an eyesore because they don't know what cleaning means in the town. I think they're just picking on the agency boards. Agency boards are very, very important. Whether it's online or in the newspaper or anywhere else or smoke signals, people do judge it. Every person, and you yourself are a prime example, Paul. When you've driven around recently looking for a house yourself, you know the areas where you want to be, and you know the agency advertising, and you're going to make up the calls to say that's the guy that seems to be having a lot of the instructions in that area. And if you're a seller, you're going to go to that person because you know that that's the person that's actually making results happen. You're not going to get that online. Yes, you might get the sticker saying it's under offer or sale agreed. And when you pick up the phone, they might say, well, we actually had a sale, but that's now fallen through. Visually, people make a lot of decisions based on the boards, where they want to be, what area is of interest to them, and more than anything else, they like to see the action happening in their area. We had a situation back many years ago where people used to put as many boards as they could glue to a property, and that was brought down to the fact that one board per property, and I think that is sufficient. I think that's a fair decision. And even though it's one board, they used to share the board, and they still do. One has one side of it, and another agent has the other side. It's still seen as one board that happens to advertise it. The fact that they feel that they want to take them all down, or you don't need to take them all down, but you can put them up, providing you got planning permission. I mean, they can't give planning permission on building houses, and it takes them ages to do that. God knows what chances there are for anybody who wants to sell any of those houses that they might have built, and they want to scupper that. So I think they should just do what they're supposed to do and not interfere in other people's business.
It's interesting actually because thinking over I think it was 8 properties I went to visit on the day that I did, only one had a board, and that was the one that was from a national chain where there's lots of offices around the country of the same brand. All the independents hadn't bothered, to be perfectly honest, and most of the properties I looked at were on the market with independents, interestingly. And in my own case, I didn't agree or was not asked by my agent, who I'm generally been happy with, and he put a post in the garden, in the front garden, which I was fine with, to be perfectly honest. But what was interesting and what I wanted to get to was 2 things. Firstly, interestingly enough, as a result of that, and I suspect either but just by chance passing, but bearing in mind I was in a cul-de-sac, the chances of people coming past and seeing the for sold sign was minimal. But I think it's geared by Rightmove. I had a number of letters through the door immediately from people who were offering me removal services or garden tidying up services or any of these sort of things because they know you're moving. So I had a number of things put through the door. I had a number of things that were posted to me. And extraordinarily, today, I've actually had an email, solicited advertisement email from Wix. Now, I've subscribed to Wix to have updates, so that's not in itself anything of a problem. But the content of the email was really interesting. It said, "So pleased you're moving." Now, how does Wix know that I'm moving? Really interesting. It's got to be data that Rightmove or Zoopla is selling on, surely.
Absolutely. And we know that under GDPR and all that kind of stuff, they've got the rights, and they get you to sign that as an agreement, and you can buy that data. I mean, constantly as an agent, we are often offered lots of mailing lists and data of people that might be in your area that are selling, or the types of properties and so forth. So no question about the fact that you're up for sale, mate. And you're up for sale in every possible way. And if it's Wix that wants to buy you, then the Wix are the guys going to knock on your door. That's the way the market. Today's value is in the data. It's the marketing of the data, and that's what all of the companies are doing. It was interesting. I popped into the car service people the other day, and I was in the area, so I popped in. So here's an example. I popped in and I said, "Oh, I was passing by. I think I want to book my car in for a service. Can we do that?" He said, "No." I said, "Why can't we do that?" He said, "Well, our company policy is that you've got to phone in." I said, "But I'm here. I'm standing in front of you, and you've got one of those things that computer says no right in front of you, and all you got to do is put in there a diary date, and I'll bring my car in." No, we can't do that. Sorry, sir. You have to call in, or you have to email us, or you have to write in, or you have to do this. You can do everything else but stand in front of me, because I can't do that. You're human, and we don't like that anymore. We want you to be a robot. So can you do that? Can you go away and actually email us or phone us? I said, "Why is that?" He said, "Well, it's all about data. They want your data." I said, "But I'm already your data. I've got a car that's been supplied by you, and I'm standing in front of you saying I want to come back to you to get my car serviced. And you're saying to me, I need to leave here and go back and pick up the phone so I can go back to my car, dial the number, sitting in front of them in their car park, and they'll book my car in for a service, but they wouldn't do it standing in front of us." That's the world we've come to, and that's the data. So it's all about data that they want, and it's data that's being sold all over the place, because people are on that online. But there is a section, people like me, perhaps past my sell-by dates, who still prefers to go in somewhere and go, "Can I book my car in, or can I do this, and can I do that?" And they say no. And so God help those that are any older than myself, because it's really tough for those people to be able to think that they want to get on the phone and try and organize this. You could be on the phone for an hour, 2 hours sometimes, waiting from one person to another. I had a similar conversation the other day with a bank. They dropped the calls 4 times, and he has to start again. It took me 4 hours to have a conversation with someone. It's ridiculous.
Find a new bank, I would suggest. Anyway, on that bombshell, let's leave it there for this week. Thanks ever so much for watching and listening to Property Matters. We'll be back very soon with another edition.